Welcome back to 6 News Live at 5. We appreciate you joining us. Lawmakers say there's an affordable housing crisis across Nebraska, and ahead of the upcoming legislative session, they're looking at possible solutions. As 6 News' Johan Marin reports, senators have found it's a costly issue without a quick fix.
State leaders are looking at 2 interim studies on affordable housing that would push cities to evaluate their low-cost living options. 6 News spoke to a North Omaha resident who testified at the hearing on the studies earlier this week.
It's been a frustration for over 10 years for me. This has been a long battle.
Gwen Easter had to sell her home because of high costs of living. And it isn't just an issue in North Omaha, but across the metro and the state. On Monday, state leaders looked over the study reports to potentially find a solution.
The purpose of these reports is to outline and discuss the city's ongoing initiatives and incentives aimed at providing and improving the ability to provide affordable housing.
The overall purpose of these studies is to define what affordable housing looks like in each city. Cities in Nebraska with a population over 20,000 people would be required to submit an evaluation of how much affordable housing they have every 2 years. But what cities receive or will do next is still unclear. For Easter, however, she believes these studies are sugarcoating the issue.
There's been many people who have gave suggestions and they still have not done anything. So it's only going to change if they really put what has been asked into practice.
On your side in North Omaha, Johan Marin, 6 News.
Lawmakers plan to hold another hearing in January when the legislative session begins to re-examine both studies.